A week after my husband's funeral, I went to my nephew's birthday party. I know how that sounds. Cruel, absurd, almost indecent. How do you go from standing beside a casket to smiling at a child over cake and balloons in 7 days? The answer is, you don't. Not really. You just put on a dress, brush your hair, answer when people speak to you, and keep moving. Because if you stop, even for a minute, it feels like the whole world will collapse right on top of your chest. I was 35 years old, and 1 week earlier, I had become a widow. Widow. I hated that word from the first second it landed on me. It sounded dusty, ancient, like a word meant for women in old black and white photographs. Not someone who still had grocery lists on the fridge, hotel reward points on her phone, and a husband whose coffee cup was still sitting by the sink because she couldn't bear to wash it. But there I was. Sophia Wallace. Widow. My sister Claire had called the night before and told me I had to come. Not asked. Told. Sam keeps asking for you, she said. He's turning 5, Sophie. He shouldn't have to feel abandoned just because you're in a dark place. A dark place. As if grief were a mood. As if my husband hadn't died in one awful day. As if the life I'd spent 13 years building with Leo had not cracked open right down the center and dropped me into it. I almost said no. I should have said no. But Claire had a way of making refusal feel selfish. She had always had that gift. Even as a child, she could make you feel guilty for not handing over your dessert, your time, your peace, your place in line, your share of the world. So I said yes. The next afternoon, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror in our brownstone in Boston and tried to decide what a grieving woman was supposed to wear to a 5-year-old's birthday party. Black felt theatrical. Blue felt too normal. In the end, I chose a simple gray wool dress, knee-length, with long sleeves. Leo loved that dress. He said it brought out the steel in my eyes. My steel girl, he used to say, sliding his arms around my waist from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder. I stared at myself in that mirror for a long time. My face looked like a version of my own face after a storm had passed through it. Dark circles. No color. Mouth set too tight. Hair pinned up because I didn't have the energy to style it. Then I looked away. The apartment was silent, in the way only a home can be when one specific person is missing from it. Not just quiet. Wrong. Leo was everywhere. And nowhere. His jacket still hung in the front hall. His drafting pencils were still in the ceramic cup on the desk in the study. His old Pink Floyd record sat in a neat stack near the turntable. The worn leather chair in the living room still had the shape of him in it. Or maybe that was just what my mind wanted to see. I grabbed my coat and left before I could change my mind. My parents lived in Quincy, in the same apartment building they'd been in since the late 1980s. 6 floors. The elevator only worked when it felt generous. Narrow halls. That familiar smell of boiled vegetables, old paper, and somebody's detergent. When I reached the door, my mother opened it before I even knocked twice. "Oh, Sophia," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. She smelled exactly the same as she had my whole life. Laundry starch, soap, and the same old perfume she refused to stop buying. Behind her, my father stood in the hallway with one hand on the wall, tall and stiff-backed, trying not to look emotional. He had always been a man who treated feelings like private injuries. "Good to see you, honey," he said quietly. I nodded. "Hi, Dad." The apartment was full already. Children's shoes by the door. Voices from the living room. The smell of cake and baked pastry from the kitchen. Everything looked normal. That was the most offensive part. How could the world still be arranged like this? when Leo was gone. Then Sam came running around the corner with his curls bouncing and a toy bulldozer in his hand. "Aunt Sophie!" he shouted. "Look, Mom got me the big one." He threw himself against my legs, and I bent to hug him, feeling his warm little arms around my neck. He pulled back and looked at me with those bright green eyes of his. "Where's Uncle Leo?" he asked. He said he would show me how to make sparks with the wires. The whole room seemed to go still around me. I heard someone in the kitchen stop moving. I heard a spoon hit ceramic. I heard the old hall clock ticking, as if it had suddenly gotten louder. I crouched down in front of Sam and took his sticky little hands in mine. "Uncle Leo," I began, and then my throat tightened so badly I almost couldn't continue. Uncle Leo had to go very far away. "Like Daddy?" he asked. Sam's father, Mark, had been an occasional visitor more than a parent. A truck driver. Always on the road. Showing up with gifts and promises, then disappearing again. "No," I said softly. "Farther than that." He frowned. "Is he coming back?" I looked into his little face and wanted, for 1 weak second, to lie. But grief had made me hate lies. "No, sweetheart," I said. "He's not." He stared at me, thinking in that serious way children do when the world hands them something too big to hold. Then he nodded once, almost solemnly, and ran off again when one of the other kids yelled his name. I stood up slowly. Across the room, Claire was carrying a tray of little pastries, smiling too brightly at everyone, moving like a woman completely at ease in her own home, her own skin, her own life. My sister was beautiful in that polished, obvious way that photographs well. Blonde hair that never seemed to frizz. Green eyes that could look innocent or cruel, depending on what she wanted. A body she worked hard to maintain and displayed like proof that she was winning some argument no one else knew they were having. She came over and kissed the air near my cheek. "You made it," she said. "Good. I was afraid you'd wallow and cancel." I looked at her. 1 week after my husband's funeral. And that was how she chose to greet me. "I'm here," I said. She smiled. "Try not to cry in front of the kids, okay?" I don't remember what I answered. Maybe nothing. Maybe just a stare. For the next couple of hours, I sat through one of the strangest experiences of my life, pretending to participate in ordinary family ritual, while everything inside me felt flayed raw. There was cake. There were balloons. My mother fussed over plates. My father muttered about children running too fast indoors. Claire's friends from college stood around the kitchen island and talked about school enrollment, property taxes, and a woman none of them liked from the PTA. Every few minutes, someone squeezed my arm and said some version of, "How are you holding up?" Poorly, I wanted to say. I'm holding up poorly. My husband is dead, my home feels haunted, and I don't know how to breathe without forcing it. Instead, I kept saying, "I'm managing." That was a lie too. But the harmless sort. The socially required sort. By late afternoon, some of the guests had started leaving. Children were being collected. Wrapping paper had been swept into one corner. Sam was on the floor making engine noises with his new bulldozer. I had just slipped my arms into my coat and was reaching for my bag when Claire said, in a voice louder than necessary, "Actually, before anyone goes, I need to say something." People paused. My mother came out of the kitchen carrying a teapot and looked instantly uneasy. "Claire," she said, "not now." "Yes, now," Claire replied. "Everyone is here. This concerns the family. This concerns—" I felt something in me go cold. My sister had always loved an audience. She set her wine glass on the side table, folded her arms, and looked directly at me. There is something Sophia needs to hear. And frankly, Mom and Dad should hear it too. "Claire," my father said sharply, "what are you doing?" She lifted her chin. Sam is Leo's son. No one moved. No one breathed. I remember every physical detail of that moment with horrible clarity. The hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The reflection of the window in the glass cabinet. My mother's hand tightening around the teapot handle. My own heartbeat, steady and strangely calm. Because even before she kept talking, I already knew one thing with total certainty. She was lying. "We had a brief affair," Claire went on, her voice gaining force as if she mistook silence for victory. "6 years ago, when Sophia was away in Chicago for that training program, it didn't last, and Leo begged me to keep it quiet. But the truth is the truth. Sam is his child." My mother gasped. My father took one step forward. "Have you lost your mind?" Claire ignored him and reached into her purse. "I didn't want to say anything while Leo was alive because I was trying to protect everyone," she said. "But now that he's gone, I have to think about my son. He is entitled to his father's legacy." She unfolded a document and held it out. "I have proof." Leo signed a statement acknowledging paternity, and as Sam's legal guardian, I am prepared to pursue his share of the estate, including the brownstone. S. The brownstone. Our house. The house Leo and I had nearly broken ourselves restoring. The house with the marble fireplace and the original moldings and the wide front windows where we'd planned to put Christmas lights for children we never had. The house where my husband's clothes were still hanging in the closet. The house she had just tried to walk into with her dirty shoes and claim. My mother looked at me in horror. "Sophia." I took the document from Claire's hand and glanced at it. Something notarized, something signed, something meant to intimidate more than withstand scrutiny. Then I handed it back. "Okay," I said. Claire blinked. "Okay?" I nodded once. "Uh-huh, okay." Her confidence wavered for the first time. "That's it?" she demanded. "You're not going to say anything?" I looked at her for a long moment. Then I smiled, because there was one thing my sister did not know about my husband. One thing almost nobody knew. Leo Wallace could not father a child. "Why would I argue?" I said quietly. "You just told an obvious lie in front of half the family." Her eyes narrowed. "It's not a lie." "It is." My voice stayed calm. "Because my husband was completely sterile." The silence that followed was different from the first one. The first silence had belonged to shock. This one belonged to impact. My father turned slowly toward Claire. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. Claire went pale, then red, then pale again. "You are making that up," she said. "No," I said. "I'm not." I picked up my bag. "And if you try to drag Leo's name through court with forged papers and a fantasy child, I will bury you with evidence." Then I walked out. I didn't wait for anyone to stop me. Didn't wait for my mother to cry, or my father to shout, or Claire to recover enough to screech after me. I took the stairs down all 6 floors and out into the wet gray evening, and only when the cold air hit my face did I realize my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. I walked for 20 minutes in the rain before I finally called Oliver. Oliver Green had been our friend since college. He was one of those men who had looked mildly unserious at 22 and somehow turned into the kind of lawyer people hired when their lives were on fire. Family law, probate disputes, custody battles, inheritance wars, the human wreckage behind polished office doors. He picked up on the second ring. "Sophia?" "Hi," I said, and my voice sounded more normal than I felt. "I need help." He was silent for half a second. "What happened?" "My sister just claimed her 5-year-old son is Leo's, and she's coming after the house." Another silence. Then, very evenly. "Tomorrow morning, my office, Bring everything you have. I don't have everything yet. Then bring what you do have and get the rest before you come. I need to go to the bank. Then go to the bank first. There was a pause. Then his tone softened. Sophia, are you alone? Yes. Can you get home safely? I looked up at the rain running off the streetlights. Yes, I said. Good. Get home, lock the door, and don't speak to Claire tonight. When I got back to the brownstone, I locked the front door, leaned against it, and stood in the dark hallway with my eyes closed. The house still smelled faintly of Leo, cedar, tea, paper, and the woodsy cologne I used to bring him from airports. I wanted to cry. I wanted to sleep for a week. Instead, I went straight to the small safe in the study, took out the keys to our safe deposit box, and set them on the kitchen counter beside my purse so I wouldn't forget them in the morning. Then I made tea in Leo's favorite glass mug with the silver holder around it, the one he found at a flea market because he said it looked like something a man would drink from while talking about railroads in 1890. I carried it out to the fire escape, wrapped in a blanket, and sat there in the cold. Below me, Boston moved as if nothing had happened. Cars, headlights, wet pavement, a siren somewhere far off. People going home to dinners and arguments and television, and lives still in progress. I took one sip of the tea. It had already gone too strong. And I thought about the secret Leo and I had kept. People think infertility is a practical sadness, a problem to solve, a bad diagnosis with a treatment path or a decision tree. They don't understand what it can do to a marriage, even when the marriage is strong, especially when the marriage is strong. When Leo and I started trying for a baby, we were happy in that hopeful, foolish way couples are before the waiting gets heavy. We tracked dates. We laughed at how serious we'd become. We picked out names in the abstract, the way people do, before reality hardens around them. Then months passed. Then more months. Then tests. My tests were normal. His weren't. A surgical complication from his teenage years had left him sterile. Completely. Irreversibly. No miracle procedure. No slim chance. No hopeful doctor saying, "Let's keep trying." I still remembered the look on his face when the specialist explained it. Not just grief. Humiliation. That ugly old idea of manhood had gotten into him, as it gets into so many good men. Build a house. Provide. Protect. Leave a child behind. Leo could do the first three better than anyone I had ever known. The fourth one broke him. We never told my parents. Never told friends. We said we were focusing on the house, on work, on timing. Sometimes on travel. Sometimes on, we'll see. Only Leo and I knew the whole truth. And that was why Claire's lie had such filth in it. She wasn't just stealing from a widow. She was stepping on the private grief of a dead man who could no longer defend himself. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I was at the bank 5 minutes before opening. It was one of those old Boston institutions Leo loved. Marble floors, high ceilings, brass fixtures polished so brightly you could see distorted versions of yourself in them. He had chosen it partly because of the location, and partly because it looked like history had happened inside it. A young employee took me to the vault and opened the box with the bank key. My own key shook in my hand on the first try. When the drawer slid open, I saw folders in Leo's neat handwriting. Mortgage, insurance, property tax records, marriage certificate copies, the will, medical. I took out the medical folder first. Inside were the reports I'd expected. Consultation notes, lab results, the final diagnostic summary, stark language, permanent infertility, no viable path to biological conception. I set those aside. Then I took out the real will. 3 years earlier, after finishing the major restoration work on the house, Leo had insisted we update everything. "If I get hit by a trolley," he said, "I don't want you digging through paperwork while crying over my corpse." That was Leo. Morbidly practical. In the service of love. The will left everything to me. Not complicated. Not dramatic. Just clean. I put it in my purse too. Then, as I was sliding the rest of the files back, I noticed an envelope at the back of the box. Cream paper. No label. I frowned and opened it. Inside was one folded sheet. My name was written on the front in Leo's hand. Sophie. My breath caught. I unfolded it slowly. My love, if you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and I hate that possibility enough to prepare for it. But you know me. I believe in plans. I read the first paragraph through tears I hadn't expected. Then I got to the part that made the whole room tilt. 6 months earlier, while I had been away in Chicago for work, Claire had come to the house drunk, claiming she needed recipes from my mother. Instead, according to Leo, she had flirted with him, touched him, cornered him, and suggested they have an affair. When he threw her out, she threatened to make trouble if he ever told me. I sat down right there on the little bench in the vault. "Your sister is dangerous," he had written. "I should have told you. I was trying not to break what remained of your relationship with her. If I was wrong, forgive me. Whatever happens, remember that I only ever loved you." By the time I finished, I was crying so hard I had to press the heel of my hand against my mouth. Even after death, he was still trying to warn me, still trying to protect me. When I reached Oliver's office on Newbury Street, he was waiting in the doorway. He hugged me without saying anything, then led me into his office and closed the door. I laid everything out on his desk. The will. The medical reports. The letter. He read each piece slowly, his expression tightening. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "All right," he said. "So, first, her document is almost certainly forged. Second, Leo was sterile, so her factual claim collapses immediately. Third, the letter is ugly but extremely useful. And I stared at him. Useful? He nodded. It establishes prior inappropriate conduct and manipulative intent. It doesn't prove everything, but it helps show pattern, as quote. I hated hearing my marriage, my husband's pain, and my sister's poison translated into legal value. But he was right. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we ask why." I frowned. "Why what?" "Why now?" he said. "Why this lie, at this moment, with this level of risk?" Money. Yes, but money from what pressure? He drummed his fingers once on the desk. People don't usually forge probate documents because they're casually greedy. They do it because they believe they're cornered, entitled, reckless, or all three. He paused. "I want to know which one your sister is." So he hired a private investigator. That part sounded melodramatic to me at first, like something from a bad streaming series. But over the next 48 hours, it became clear Oliver had been exactly right. Claire was in trouble. Not abstract trouble. Not the kind you can hide under makeup and sharp clothing. Real trouble. Credit card debt. Overdue medical bills. Payment plans. Missed payments. 2 private loans. One taken out under terms so predatory that even Oliver made a face when he saw the paperwork. And then there was Sam. Sam was sick. Not with something temporary. Not with a common childhood condition. A serious autoimmune illness that required ongoing treatment, specialist care, monitoring, medication, and a cost structure that would have broken a stronger person than Claire. When Oliver told me, I didn't answer right away. I just looked out the window of his office at the gray Boston sky and saw Sam's face in my mind. His little hands, his bulldozer, his question, "Where's Uncle Leo?" A child can be innocent and still stand in the center of a lie. That was one of the cruelest things I'd learned in that week. For a moment, I felt something in me soften. Then Oliver continued, "There's more." Of course there was. He handed me another folder. Mark cannot be Sam's biological father. I blinked. What? There are prior records from a fertility evaluation during their separation, limited, but enough to make paternity highly unlikely. I stared at him. Leo couldn't be the father. Mark couldn't be the father. Then who? I looked up sharply. Oliver held my gaze for a second too long. "No," I said before he could speak. "No?" He slid a photograph across the desk. "Claire. And Nicholas Wallace. My father-in-law. Leo's father." They were sitting at an outdoor cafe, leaning toward each other with the unmistakable posture of people who had crossed lines already and were no longer pretending not to. I felt something drop through me so fast and hard. I had to grip the arms of the chair. "No," I said again, but weaker. "There are multiple sightings," Oliver said quietly. "Dates that overlap with the conception timeline, financial transfers too. He had been supporting her off the books." My father-in-law. Nicholas had been refined, charming, educated, admired. An architecture professor. The sort of man who could discuss Roman arches over red wine and make everyone at the table feel slightly less literate. I had loved him. Leo had adored him. And all the time, under dinners and holidays and family photographs, that rot had been there. I pressed my fingertips to my forehead. "So, Sam," I whispered. Oliver didn't answer immediately, but he didn't have to. I stood up and walked to the window because sitting felt impossible. The city blurred. Claire hadn't chosen Leo's name because the story made sense. She had chosen it because Leo was dead. Because Leo couldn't defend himself. Because Leo was the safest Wallace man to hang the lie on. And maybe because Nicholas, unlike Leo, would have destroyed everything still living if his name were dragged into court. I turned back to Oliver. "We need proof." "We need care," he corrected. "We need proof, yes, but we also need to think 3 moves ahead. If Sam is Nicholas's child, and if he is ill, then this is no longer just about defeating Claire. It's about deciding what kind of truth you want to unleash and on whom." That sentence stayed with me all the way home. Because he was right. Truth is not gentle, just because it is true. That evening, I went to see Eleanor. My mother-in-law lived alone in the Berkshires now, in the old family house, but she had come down to Boston for a few days after the funeral and was staying in a small suite near the Common, because she said hotels were easier than being surrounded by Nicholas's things. Nicholas had died 2 years earlier. Heart failure. Sudden enough to shock. Slow enough to leave behind a trail of unfinished business no one understood yet. Eleanor opened the hotel room door wearing a navy sweater and cream slacks, her silver hair pinned back, her posture flawless. She looked tired in the way women of her generation often do, when they have decided to remain composed at all costs. "Sophia," she said, touching my cheek. "Come in." There was tea waiting on the small table by the window. Of course there was. I sat down across from her and realized, with a kind of dread, that I was about to tell a mother who had buried her son that her late husband had betrayed both of them in one blow. I thought she might break. I underestimated her. I told her everything. Claire's claim, the forged document, Leo's infertility, the letter, the debts, Sam's illness, the photographs, Nicholas. I spoke slowly, carefully, expecting denial at any point. Eleanor did not interrupt once. When I finished, she lifted her teacup, set it down again, and asked only one question. "Is the child truly ill?" I stared at her. "Yes." She nodded once. "Then we helped the child." I felt my eyes fill unexpectedly. Then she added, in the same calm tone, "And that has nothing to do with what your sister has done." I looked at her. There it was. The line. So clear. So clean. So morally exact. It almost hurt. Helping Sam did not mean surrendering the truth. Having mercy on a child did not mean excusing a mother. A child should not lose treatment because his mother lied. A mother should not be allowed to turn her child's illness into a license for fraud. Those were not the same question. Eleanor saw that immediately. "I want a DNA test," she said. Quietly, properly. "If the boy is Nicholas's, then he is family, whether I like the manner of his conception or not. But Claire will not take my son's name and use it as a ladder." I almost laughed at the force in that last sentence. Not because it was funny, because it sounded so much like Leo. We arranged the meeting for the next morning at Oliver's office. Neutral ground. No hallway performance. No family audience. No emotional ambush. Just a conference room, a lawyer, evidence, and the truth waiting like a blade on the table. Claire arrived 10 minutes late. She came in wearing a cream coat and expensive boots, carrying herself with the kind of brittle confidence people put on when they suspect they are about to be hit, but haven't yet seen from which direction. Then she saw who was there. Oliver at the head of the table. Me on one side. Eleanor on the other. And on the polished wood between us, and folders. Her face changed. "What is this?" she asked. "A conversation," Oliver said. She sat down slowly. "I've already told Sophia the truth." "No," I said. "You told me a lie." Her jaw tightened. Oliver slid the forged paternity paper toward her first. "We've had this reviewed." She didn't touch it. Then he laid down the medical reports. Leo Wallace was medically sterile for years before Sam was born. Claire didn't look at those either. She looked at me. "You told them?" she said, almost accusingly. "No," I said. "I protected Leo. You forced my hand." Oliver placed Leo's letter on the table. "This establishes prior inappropriate conduct and a threat." Now Claire did look down. For 1 second. Enough. Then Oliver set out the financial records. The overdue bills. The treatment costs. The loan statements. Tears sprang to Claire's eyes immediately. A tactical response, I thought at first. Then Oliver placed the photograph of her and Nicholas between us. Everything in her face collapsed. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Just all at once. As if whatever scaffolding she had built inside herself had finally given way. Eleanor spoke before I could. "Sam is Nicholas's son, isn't he?" Claire covered her mouth. No answer. Just tears. Then, eventually, a nod. I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes for 1 second. Not because I was surprised anymore, because hearing the truth out loud made it real in a new way. When I opened my eyes again, Claire was crying the hard, ugly cry of someone who has run out of strategic options and is left with nothing but ruin. "Right? It was never supposed to happen," she said. That sentence made something hot flash through me. "They never are," I said. She looked at me with hatred, shame, and pleading all mixed together. "You don't understand." "Then explain." And she did. Not nobly. Not cleanly. But fully. Years earlier, while I had been away, Nicholas had started paying attention to her. She had felt invisible, she said. Trapped. Angry. Jealous of me, though she didn't use that word. She talked about my marriage, my house, my career, my life, as if all of it had been arranged to insult her simply by existing. Nicholas had flattered her, helped her, paid for things, crossed boundaries. Then more. Then all of them. When she got pregnant, she panicked. Nicholas panicked too. He gave her money. Set up quiet transfers. Promised support. Pressured her to tell no one. Mark was already halfway out the door as a partner and easy to name as the father because no one was paying close attention anymore. Then Nicholas died. Then the money thinned. Then Sam got sick. Then the bills came. Then she looked around and saw one dead Wallace man and one very valuable house. And she chose. I listened to all of it, feeling like I was being forced to watch someone strip the skin off my past. Not just because of Leo, because of the years before that, the dinners, the holidays, the little moments, relit in poisonous color. Claire laughing at the table while Nicholas poured wine. Eleanor asking after everyone's work. Leo describing some restoration project, while Rot sat right there in the room with us, wearing a tie. When Claire finished, no one spoke for a while. Then Eleanor straightened her back and folded her hands. There will be a DNA test, she said. If Sam is Nicholas's child, he will receive medical support and a trust structure for future care. Claire looked up with desperate hope. Eleanor's expression did not change. But your crimes remain your own. Forgery, false claims, defamation against my son. Do not mistake help for forgiveness. 1. I had never seen Claire go so still. That was the moment she finally understood that she was no longer dealing with a family system that would bend around her noise. We made an agreement that day. Though agreement sounds cleaner than it felt. Claire would immediately withdraw every false claim relating to Leo. She would sign a statement acknowledging that she had fabricated the paternity allegation and provided forged documents. Oliver would hold off on criminal referral, contingent on full compliance, documented cooperation, and 0 future claims against Leo's estate. Eleanor would proceed with private testing and, if confirmed, create a protected medical trust for Sam. Not for Claire. For Sam. That distinction mattered. Everything after that moved in slow, exhausting layers. The DNA test came back 2 weeks later. Positive. Sam was Nicholas Wallace's biological son, a half-brother to Leo, my nephew by marriage, and something even stranger, by blood logic. The family tree twisted itself into a shape so ugly and absurd that I stopped trying to explain it neatly. What mattered was simpler. Leo had not betrayed me. Sam was innocent. Claire had lied. Nicholas had done what dead men often do, left living people to choke on the consequences of his appetites. My parents took the news badly. My mother cried for hours. Not just over the scandal, but over the realization that she had spent her whole life handling Claire with phrases like, "Be patient, let it go, she's sensitive, don't provoke her," and that all those little acts of family surrender had built a runway for disaster. My father didn't speak to Claire for 3 months. When he finally did, it was to tell her that desperation explains behavior, but does not absolve it. For once, no one in the family rushed to soften that sentence. And that may have been the deepest shift of all. Because the truth was, Claire had not become dangerous overnight. She had been rehearsing danger for years. She had always been the person around whom everyone adjusted. The one we made excuses for. The one we kept accommodating in the name of peace. I had done it too. I, of all people, had spent half my life being the bigger person. Be the bigger person. What a polite family phrase. For spiritual self-erasure. I thought being good meant absorbing, enduring, smoothing edges, making space, swallowing offense, protecting holidays. But all that really meant was that Claire never had to feel the full shape of a boundary, until she finally ran headfirst into one made of law, documents, death, and a child she could not use as a shield anymore. A month later, I went back to the brownstone alone, after meeting with Oliver and the trust administrator. The house was quiet. Sunlight was falling across the floor in the front room in that same late afternoon angle Leo loved, because it made the old wood glow. I stood by the fireplace and looked at the watercolor he had bought years earlier, the one of Old Boston with Beacon Hill in the distance. "Circle complete," he had said when he hung it up. An old view of the city, inside an old house, loved by two old souls. I laughed then. I cried now. Not the sharp cry of shock, something lower and slower. The kind that comes when enough truth has been hauled into the light that grief can finally set down some of its fighting posture. Leo had not betrayed me. That mattered more than the house, more than the scandal, more than anything Claire could ever have tried to steal. She had taken a lot from me, but not that. Never that. Over the next year, Eleanor and I became linked in a way neither of us would have chosen, and both of us came to value. She visited Boston often for Sam's appointments. Sometimes we had lunch afterward, sometimes tea, sometimes just paperwork and conversation. She never pretended the situation was less ugly than it was. That was one of the reasons I came to love her more than I already had. She spoke plainly. "That boy did not ask to be born into deceit," she said once, reviewing invoices at my dining table. "I will not let him pay for adult cowardice with his body." There it was again. That moral precision. Not sentimentality. Not denial. Not dramatic forgiveness. Just truth, arranged in the correct order. Sam improved slowly. The first time I saw him 6 months into treatment, he looked stronger. Still too thin, but brighter somehow. Less fragile around the eyes. He sat at my kitchen table eating toast and asked if Uncle Leo had really liked old houses more than new ones. "Very much," I said. "Why?" "Because," he said, "old houses prove that if something is built well, loved properly, and repaired when needed, it can outlive almost anything." Sam nodded as if that made perfect sense. Then he said, "I think that's cool." I smiled. So did he. I started telling him stories after that. Not all at once. Just little ones. How Leo used to hum while measuring things. How he once drove 3 hours for one antique brass doorknob because he said the wrong hardware could ruin a room's dignity. How he liked his tea too hot and his music too loud when he was drawing late. I did not do it for sentiment. I did it because Sam had loved him, and because children deserve clean stories, where they can get them. As for Claire, I kept my distance. Some people think a dramatic revelation should end in either total reconciliation or total annihilation. Life is messier. I did not forgive her in any grand cinematic sense. I did not cut her off with blazing speeches either. I drew a line and left it there. We spoke when necessary. About Sam. About schedules. About documents. About things with edges and purposes. Nothing more. Maybe someday that will change. Maybe not. But I learned something through all of it that I wish I'd learned 10 years earlier. Family is not protected by silence. Silence protects the person who benefits most from it. Family is not preserved by pretending the unbearable is manageable. That only stretches the unbearable across more years and more people. And being the bigger person is not a virtue. When bigger simply means easier to stand on. A year after Sam's diagnosis was stabilized, I went with Eleanor to one of his specialist appointments. He held both our hands as we crossed the parking lot, mine on one side, hers on the other. For one strange moment, the shape of us looked almost normal from the outside. Grandmother, aunt, child. No one passing us would have guessed the wreckage beneath the arrangement. Inside the clinic, while Sam was getting his blood drawn, Eleanor looked at me and said, "Leo would have liked the way you handled this." I looked down. I was furious the whole time. Of course you were. I wanted to destroy her. I know. I laughed once under my breath. Part of me still does. Eleanor gave the smallest nod. That is why character matters, she said. Feeling is weather. Character is structure. Leave it to a woman who married an architect and raised one to say something like that. I thought about it all the way home. Feeling is weather. Character is structure. That was Leo too. And maybe, in the end, that was what had carried me through. Not some saintly goodness. Not some impossible grace. Structure. Truth. Evidence. Boundaries. Refusal. Care for the innocent. Protection for the dead. A line drawn and kept. That was the architecture that remained, when everything decorative had been stripped away. 2 years after the birthday party, I found the bulldozer toy under the radiator in my parents' guest room while helping my mother clean. I picked it up and just stood there, remembering that first terrible afternoon. Sam's question, Claire's lie, my smile. My mother came in behind me and saw what I was holding. For a second, we just looked at each other. Then she said, very quietly, "I should have stopped making excuses for her years ago." I didn't answer right away, because what could I say that wouldn't be partly cruel and partly true? Finally, I said, "We all should have." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. And there it was again. Another kind of grief. The grief of hindsight. The grief of seeing the old pattern clearly too late to prevent the damage, but maybe not too late to prevent the repetition. I put the toy on the windowsill. Outside, evening was settling over Quincy. Inside, my mother wiped her eyes and kept sorting old mail into recycling. Life does that. It breaks your heart, and then asks whether you're still capable of ordinary motions. Most days, the answer has to be yes. I still miss Leo in stupid, practical ways. When I need a light bulb changed on a high fixture, I think of him. When I see a badly restored doorway, I hear his voice. When I pass a secondhand store with old records in the window, I still feel the impulse to text him. Grief does not leave. It changes weight. But one thing became easier after the truth came out. I no longer had to defend him against a lie in my own mind. He was innocent. Wounded, yes. Human, yes. Secretive in ways I wish he had not been, yes. But innocent of the one betrayal that would have poisoned every memory I had of him. That gift, strange as it sounds, came wrapped in scandal. And maybe that is the cruel shape of some blessings. They arrive late, bloody, expensive. Still, they arrive. If you had told me at 35 that widowhood would teach me more about family than marriage ever did, I would have hated you for saying it. But it's true. I learned that blood is not the same thing as loyalty. That pity without boundaries becomes permission. That mercy must be aimed carefully, or it turns into complicity. That children should never be made to carry the moral debts of the adults who made them. And that sometimes the only way to save what is decent in a family is to stop protecting the lies that keep it looking whole. Sam is older now, old enough to know pieces, not all. One day he will know more. Maybe all of it. Maybe not from me. Maybe from documents. Maybe from Claire, if honesty ever becomes something she can bear for longer than a season. When that day comes, I hope he understands one thing clearly. He was never the problem. He was the reason we had to become better than the problem. As for the brownstone, I still live there. The mortgage is gone now. The front steps need work again. Old houses never stop asking for something. A repair, a repaint, a patch, a careful eye. Sometimes on cool evenings, I sit on the fire escape with tea and think about what Leo said, that good structures survive if someone loves them enough to keep repairing what time and weakness break. I used to think he was only talking about houses. Now I know better. Some structures should be repaired. Some should be condemned. And some, if they are honest enough at the foundation, can survive almost anything. Claire tried to take my house. What she really tried to take was my certainty, my memory of my husband, my right to grieve cleanly, my place inside the story of my own life. She failed. Not because I was fearless. I wasn't. Not because I was kind. I wasn't. Not always. Not because the truth came easily. It didn't. She failed because grief made me shake. But it did not make me weak. And because when the lie finally stood in front of me, wearing my sister's face, I did something I should have learned to do years earlier. I stopped being the bigger person, and I started being a wall.